Hi, Zach Reiser here, and welcome back to another effects pedal demo. Today, we are getting into something completely different than anything I've ever gotten into on my channel. We are talking about a mixer, but this is not just any mixer. This is the Matrix Mixer from Erica Synths. To start us off, what makes the Matrix Mixer special or unique in comparison to a more standard mixer like up here? Well, on a standard mixing console, we have lots of inputs, but in general, those inputs are hardwired or directly routed to the two main outputs designed to be sent to headphones or studio monitors left and right. On the Matrix Mixer, we have 16 inputs, but we also have 16 outputs. And then even more importantly, we can route any input to any output in any way that we would see fit. So the Matrix Mixer could act as a mixer for lots of different inputs, so we can choose on the fly which instrument we want to go to our main output. You also could have this be sub-mixes going out individual outputs into a more standard mixing console if you'd like. So you could have like different effects chains with different instruments, for instance. You can create feedback loops because we can take the output of one right back into itself if we would like to. And really the options are pretty much endless. So to make things a little bit more clear, let's just talk about the setup because this is quite a bit different than what the viewers on my channel are maybe used to seeing. First off, I'm not just using my bass. You probably can see the Arturia drum brute impact up in the top left of the screen there, and you also can't see, but my Moog Matriarch is off to the right, and I'm controlling that with the Arturia KeyStep Pro. Now, this is where it might be a little bit confusing for certain people because you might not be comfortable with the idea of an output being a send, for instance, to a pedal. But just to make things clear here, for instance, on the Eventide, you can see these kind of teal cables. So the two inputs here are actually coming from outputs. And I hope that makes sense because you're taking your signal and sending it out of the mixer into the inputs of the pedal, and then the output of the pedal are actually inputs. So this is really creating like a little effect send, if you will. And same thing is happening on the Volante. So these are the two outputs of the Volante. These are the two inputs of the Volante. And then we also have my bass and the Matriarch are plugged in the back of the pedal. That's why these are not patched. So my bass is on input 1 and my Matriarch is on input 2. The drum brute impact is right here on input 3. And then the main output, what's being sent to my audio interface, is coming out of A and B, and those are hardwired in the back. Now, if you plug something into these, it would break that connection and you could send them out to whatever you'd like. Now, hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but I think it'll make a lot more sense when we actually start to make a simple kind of patch or route. So what we're going to do here is the simplest thing that we can possibly do, which is route an instrument to an output, very much the way like a traditional mixer would work. So again, my bass is coming in on input 1 here. You don't see it patched because it's coming in on one of the main inputs on the back, and that's this top row on the grid here. And then the main outputs left and right are on A and B coming out the back. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to slide around in the grid on line 1. So anything on line 1 is sending my bass, which is coming in on channel 1, to whichever output I would like it to go to. In this case, I want it to go to left and right. So now I should have my bass coming directly through the mixer into my audio interface. Pretty straightforward. Now, let's say that instead of my bass, I wanted to route the Matriarch. Well, that's very simple. I'm just going to clear A and B here off of line 1, which is my bass. I'm going to drop down to line 2, and now I have the Matriarch, which is coming in on input 2, routed to my main output. So hopefully you can see it's very simple to set up these very basic ideas or basic patches. An input to an output. And of course, you can save these because this has built-in scenes or presets, so you can save kind of like the setup or the routing for your entire system if you have a pretty complex setup like I have going here, or if you just wanted this to be like a pedal board manager, then you could plug all your pedals into all the inputs and outputs, and this would be kind of like a switching system. So for instance, I can save this matriarch going to the output setting here on wherever I'd like. We'll save it here, and then I could go back and make that just simple preset of my bass going to the output, and then save that on a different preset. And now I can flick back and forth with these little pattern buttons, or if you had a MIDI controller, you could do the same thing. So this is just my bass and the matriarch. So hopefully by now you get an idea of how we're routing a single instrument or a single input to, in this case, a pair of outputs because they're in stereo. But now let's take it a little bit farther and let's route an input, in this case, the matriarch. Yet again, the matriarch is on line 2 or input 2 here. And right now it's routed directly to the output, but now let's route it through an effect and then the effect into the output. So the way we're going to do that here is we're going to clear this row. And now instead of putting it onto the output, we're going to send the matriarch to the cables here that go to the input of the eventide, which in this case is outputs E and F. And I'm sending it to both because I want it to be sent in stereo. And now I'm going to go down to the inputs coming from the eventide, which are inputs 7 and 8. And I'm going to route those to the output. And now what we'll have is the matriarch running through the reverb on the eventide H9, and then the H9 being sent to the output. So let's say you want to stack another pedal in this effects pedal chain. Well, all we have to do is put it in our routing somewhere in the matrix. So right now, instead of going to the eventide, I'm going to take the matriarch and I'm going to actually send it to the Strymon. So we're going to go to outputs G and H. So now, if I go down to the inputs, right now these are the inputs from the H9. So what relates to the Strymon are these yellow cables, which is 9 and 10. So we're going to go down here to 9 and then down to 10. And now we'll have the matriarch going through the delay. So now let's take this a little bit further. Let's take this matriarch into the volante. Instead of going directly to the output, though, we're going to take the outputs of the volante and send them to the inputs of the H9, and then the outputs of the H9 to the main output. So the output from the volante is 9 and 10, and we're going to send that to the inputs on the H9, E and F, and then we're going to take the outputs, which are 7 and 8 from the H9, and route that to the master output. And now what we have is the matriarch being sent to the volante, and then the outputs of the volante being sent to the H9, and then the outputs of the H9 being sent to the main output. So what we have is our very kind of classic setup of almost like the way you would wire something on a pedal board, but in this case, it is totally malleable. So for instance, if we wanted to, we could flip the order of those pedals. So instead of having the volante running into the H9, we could have the H9 running into the volante. And you also can do parallel chains, and I'm going to show that now. So what we're going to do is, instead of routing the matriarch into the Strymon and then the Strymon into the H9, we're going to route the matriarch into both the H9 and the Strymon at the same time, and then we're going to route both the Strymon and the H9 to the outputs at the same time. So now what's going on is instead of a series signal, matriarch Strymon, H9, it is a parallel split. So we have the matriarch going into both the Volante and the H9 at the same time and then being sent to the outputs separately. So hopefully you're seeing the power that we have already in regards to kind of a single instrument coming in on an input, because we have the ability to route that instrument to anything plugged in to any of the inputs and outputs, but we also can make series chains and parallel chains. So you can do some pretty interesting processing here where you actually could have a series chain through a couple pedals and then split into a parallel processing signal. You even could process the signal differently on the left and the right side of your master outputs. Also, one thing I want to make sure is clear, I'm routing everything to a stereo pair into my audio interface, but you of course could take any of these outputs as actual outputs as well. So let's say you have a mixing console like I do up here. I could have routed a stereo pair from these last four into 4 stereo pairs on my mixing console and had individual control going into an audio interface or a DAW, whatever you want to use it for. So let's take this one step further. We've done series and parallel routing. Now let's talk about doing parallel chains. So not parallel routing with a single instrument, but actually 2 separate instruments going to 2 different effects in this case. And I actually showed this at the beginning of the video. So if I click back through my presets here, we'll find one where I have this set up already, and let's talk about it. So the way I want this to be really visually clear is that I want to show you the 2 individual chains as presets, and then show you that it's literally just those presets laid on top of each other. So on this preset, we've done this before. We have the matriarch input 2 being sent to the H9 and the outputs of the H9 being sent to the master outputs, and that gives us this lovely synth into reverb sound. Click over one preset, and now we have input 3, which is the drum brute, going into the Volante, and then the outputs of the Volante, 9 and 10, going to the master outputs. So now we have the drums, and I can add delay to the drums. So now let's take a look at what this looks like when we have both of those presets happening at the same time, or 2 parallel processing chains with 2 different instruments, 2 different inputs. So looking at this preset, which is the matriarch into the H9, and this preset, which is the drum brute into the Volante, we go to the one where they're combined, and it's literally the 2 laid on top of each other. So matriarch into H9, Arturia into the Volante, and then both the Volante and the H9 going to the master outputs. Now what this allows, of course, is we can play the drums into the delay at the same time that we play the synth into the reverb. So the Matrix Mixer is really just kind of an overall utility device, in my opinion. It allows you to take your pedal board, if that's what you're using it for. You can kind of think of it yet again like a switching system, or your whole setup with all kinds of different instruments and inputs and outputs and how you want those routed, where you want them routed to. It also allows you to do something that I've been looking for a way to do for a while, which is if you have some effects that you really like, the ability to put those effects on any instrument in your setup without having to rewire your whole setup. So sometimes, for instance, I'm really in the mood for the Volante with the drum brute, but if I plug that in directly, then obviously my bass can't go into the Volante anymore. So that goes kind of like Swiss Army knife utility factors of the Matrix Mixer are really quite cool. Now, the one thing I will say about the Matrix Mixer is that, to be completely frank, I'm having a little bit of issues with some grounding, and I don't know if that's user error or if that's something with the Matrix Mixer, but I am having some grounding issues here and there with certain devices, and I'm trying to track that down a little bit in my signal, but with the way I have it set up here, it's been pretty clean overall throughout this whole demo. The one other thing I will say about the Matrix Mixer, especially for people that aren't used to Eurorack or modular, is that these are all 1/8 inch inputs or 3.5 millimeter jacks, which are kind of the standard Eurorack patch bay size. So if you are using effects pedals like this or instruments that have normal 1/4 inch jacks, be aware you're going to need a lot of adapters or lots of 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch cables. And honestly, it's a little bit frustrating, but if they had put 1/4 inch jacks on here, this thing would have been massive. You can imagine 16 full-size jacks would have made this thing huge. So I understand why they went with the 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter jacks. So this was my demo of the Matrix Mixer from Erica Synths. I really hope that you got something out of this video. Even if you're not necessarily going to go for a Matrix Mixer, I highly recommend you give one a try if you can, because they are surprisingly powerful in terms of what they can do, and honestly very inspiring. To be able to just route anything to anything without having to change a single cable makes experimentation much faster. If you enjoyed this video, as usual, please like, subscribe, and share all that good stuff. It really does help me out, and I will be back very soon with more videos. Thank you so much for watching.